Rob Flounders here with Johnny McGonigal. Time for a Blue White Breakdown podcast. Had some news already today, Monday. Not huge news, but news worth talking about. Still, I think, Johnny, I think Penn State fans are still pretty wound up about the news that Penn State got the whiteout game that it wanted and probably deserved. Oregon coming to Beaver Stadium, I think on the 27th, final Saturday for a night game on NBC. In prime time, a rematch of the Big Ten championship game. We can get to that. Also, I wanted to talk to you about Penn State fans. Check out Penn Live today or whenever you get a chance. Johnny's got a really detailed, well-done story on Penn State great Dan Connor's path back to Penn State, where he's now the linebackers coach. Very, very much, I think, on the fast track. He was an impressive player. He's an impressive guy, Johnny, to talk to. And also, he's a Delco guy, so I knew that's why we were going to do this story, no matter what you say, Johnny. But it's good hearing from you. Where do you want to start?
Let's start with the whiteout, and then we can get into. I can give a little bit of more detail and background about the Dan Connor story a little later. Let's kick off with the whiteout because it's something that when Max and I were recording and we were live last Thursday, we hit live at noon on Thursday, and then I think it was at 12:01 that Penn State Athletics announced that it was going to be the whiteout. And Max and I are frantically like, oh, shoot, breaking news. Let's do it live. And we texted you off to the side like, hey, we're on the podcast. Can you write up the story real quick while we're away? And thank you for your help there. Much appreciated.
No problem. No problem.
So Max and I talked a little bit about it, just our reactions to it being the Oregon game on NBC, 7:30, September 27th. But Bob, we didn't get your take on it. So I'll throw it to you and just some of your thoughts. And then I have a couple things to add to it as well in terms of how it came to be that Penn State is playing Oregon.
Yeah, you kind of went through the process of how the pecking order and how it escaped Big Noon. Because Penn State fans get upset when Penn State's best game is on at Big Noon. I don't blame them. My thoughts on the whiteout game are as follows. I don't know how you feel, Johnny, but I don't think it's the worst thing in the world for Oregon to have this game in prime time, because one of the other alternatives was if this was a noon kick, that would have been an early kick for a huge game for a West Coast team. And I don't agree with this. And there's got to be some way around this. I don't know what they can do, but it's hard to change your body clocks like that for a game like this. And I do think that Oregon's going to hear all off season about, it's the whiteout. You guys have no shot. And this is a good team. And I do think when a good team comes into Penn State to play a whiteout game against Penn State's got a very good team, obviously, this year. I mean, more often than not, it's going to be a good game. I mean, it's going to be one of those games that's probably going to hang in the balance. I don't see why it wouldn't be this year. Oregon lost a lot of players. They got a lot of good players back. I really like their coach. When I think of the Oregon program, I just think about last year and how their season gets forgotten because of they ran into Ohio State in the Rose Bowl in the quarters, a team they'd already beaten. They beat Penn State for the Big Ten title. They beat a good Boise State team early in the season, but I think everyone just kind of remembers they started slow against Ohio State, and Ohio State played probably its best game of the year, and that's a good team. It's going to be a good team again. I think, though, I don't know, if I was Oregon and my choice was face off against Penn State in prime time with the world watching, or have to play a game at noon, knowing that maybe physically we're not going to be completely alert. As good as Penn State is, I don't have a huge problem, and I think Oregon's going to really very much look forward to this game.
Yeah, Bob, I hadn't considered that, but you know what? It's a totally valid and fair point, and I agree with you. Two things to add on that. One, I'm sure if you're a college football fan, you've seen videos of Dan Lanning go around, his pregame speeches, his post-practice speeches. In terms of a motivator in college football, there are a few more adept at that than Dan Lanning, Oregon's head coach. And so, in that atmosphere, he's going to be, at least in terms of preparation, like they're going to be ready to go from an emotional standpoint. He is a damn good coach. And that's not something that can be overlooked. Like you mentioned, they lost a lot of guys to the NFL. They're going to have a new quarterback. Happens to be a 5-star in Dante Moore, so that helps. They're going to be replacing a lot of guys on this team, but I mean, they did great work in the portal. They've done a great job developing over the last few years. And wouldn't doubt, I mean, they're a preseason top 10 team. So that's going to be one of the games of the year. The other thing to consider in terms of the travel aspect of this, so Oregon does not have a bye week before the game, and they play Oregon State. They play them at home, and Oregon State is, it's not your Jaquiz Rogers days Oregon State, but that's still a rivalry game for them. And, emotions will be high in that game regardless of the level of competition there from the Beavers. So coming off that game, like you said, if it was a noon start, if it was a big noon kickoff on Fox, in terms of the preparation, it might have been a little bit more difficult on the Ducks. And now they get a night game. They get a little bit more time to rest, recover, get to State College and be ready for this game. So, yeah, an interesting point you brought up and one I agree with.
Yeah, and also Penn State does have a bye, right? Penn State will be rested and ready coming off that threatening non-conference schedule that precedes the Oregon game, FIU, Nevada, and Villanova. But no, they'll have the bye week. It's set up their schedule's set up about as well as it can be, given the fact that they do have to play at Ohio State. But I believe there's another bye week ahead of that one, but still. It's just every once in a while you're going to have to go on the road and win a big game in the regular season. And if Penn State wants to get where they need to be, they don't have to beat Ohio State in Columbus. But I do think this is a team that absolutely matches up great with an Ohio State team that's coming off a lot of significant losses. We don't have to go into James Franklin's record at this time, but it will get brought up, I think, as we get closer to kickoff. But yeah, Penn State's got a bye before the Oregon game, before the Ohio State game. And with the team they have coming back, I mean, the schedule does set up awfully well. I think, though, that this is a game that I think the Penn State fan base is really, it's as far as atmospheres go, because a lot of the recent, either the whiteouts or Ohio State coming in at noon to play, they haven't really had, I think, a game quite like this in prime time with a team like this coming back at Penn State. So I just think, I think Oregon's going to enjoy the atmosphere, but it's probably in their best interest to start fast.
Yeah, no, it's one of those that Penn State fans, understandably and rightfully so, are really excited about, because the last 3 years, those 2 Ohio State games at home and the Michigan game sandwiched in between, both of those were big noon, all 3 of those were big noon kickoffs. And so Penn State had to pivot in terms of their whiteout game. With Washington last year, you had Iowa the year before, Minnesota the year before that. The margin of victory in those 3 games combined were pretty favorable in Penn State's favor. They were all blowouts for the most part. I think Iowa was 31-0 last year. They took care of Washington pretty handily, and it was 45-17 against Minnesota a few years back. But, you look at the way this kind of fell for Penn State, for it to be a whiteout, for the Oregon game to be a whiteout. Everyone kind of knows, like, it's pretty well known around, at least, covering the Big Ten, how Fox's contract is set up with the Big Ten, that they have a draft. The 3 television partners with the Big Ten, Fox, CBS, NBC, every offseason when the schedule comes out, they do a draft. And in terms of, they pick the weekends that they want, and then they go ahead and they obviously pick the weekends around the marquee game that they ultimately want to feature. Fox always has the first 3 picks. And then, Scott Docterman from The Athletic reported that it alternates in terms of the number 4 overall pick every year between CBS and NBC. This year was NBC with the number 4 pick. And so it lands on NBC. Well, how did that happen? So it was the 4th pick in this draft. The first overall pick, well, at least one of the first 3 picks, was Ohio State, Texas. The Ohio State hosts Texas in their opener. That was confirmed already, big noon kickoff. Fox always has Ohio State, Michigan on the docket as a noon game. Yep. So then there's a 3rd that's floating out there right now that hasn't been identified yet. But I don't know, Bob. I think both me and you could, we could put our money safely on it being Penn State's trip at Ohio State on November 1st, being big noon kickoff. Yep. So those 3, I mean, that hasn't been announced yet, but I mean, put that one in pen probably. So that's kind of how this worked out for Penn State. It was like the added non-conference game, Ohio State, Texas,
Yeah.
that Fox wanted, basically took Fox away from one of the three biggest Big Ten games of the year, and it fell to NBC. And they're like, "Yeah, we'll take it." 7:30 night game. NBC is also broadcasting the Ryder Cup that weekend. They've got Packers Cowboys on Sunday Night Football. So they've got a great package of sports for that weekend that they can sell and advertise. I'm sure we'll be seeing plenty of it leading up in through September.
Ryder Cup, always exciting. Johnny, I know you're going to have some money on that. Where is it this year? Do you know?
It's at Bethpage Black up in
boy,
New York. Yeah.
Oh boy, that's going to be something.
I cannot wait.
All right, Johnny, let's move it along here. Let's go to. I wanted to get to your, because it's pretty fresh. Both news items are pretty fresh, but your story on Dan Connor, Penn State's. He's the linebackers coach. He's been at Penn State for the last couple of years, previously as a defensive analyst, but his role is growing and growing. He was pretty much the de facto, I think, linebackers coach in a lot of ways. Last year, he had one of the key roles on the Penn State defense last year when Tom Allen bumped up to the coaching booth from being on the field. I think after 2 games, after the Bowling Green game, Dan was in communication with him, getting the plays into Kobe or whoever was, if Kobe wasn't on the field, he was kind of communicating quickly. And he obviously did a very good job at that. But Dan Connor is on the short list of Penn State great linebackers, and there's been so many of them. He is right up there. He's the program's all-time leading tackler, Pennsylvania prep kid, standout, played early, played well, played at the same time or right around the same time. He shaved some time, I think, with Paul Posluszny and also Sean Lee, but he had some memorable games. He's a heck of a player, had a pretty nice career in the NFL. He was a Dallas Cowboy, but he was drafted by the Panthers. His career probably would have lasted longer, but he had a couple of injuries that really kind of limited what he could do late in his NFL career. But one of the most impressive things I think about Dan Connor is the mindset. And he was, he had to pay his dues to get to Penn State, and he did it. He didn't do it the easy way. If you look at his resume, the stops he was at prior to Penn State, they were not. One of them was a high school stop. He was at some colleges that were not very big, but it shows his commitment, and his focus to getting to be a linebackers coach. And if he wants to be, I'm sure down the line he could be one heck of a defensive coordinator. And we'll just see what the future has in store for him. But he's only 39. But I just think, as much as his value to Penn State as a player and now as a coach, it's also, I think, his path to get to Penn State is also quite impressive.
Yeah, I had a really good conversation with Dan a couple weeks ago, and he was calling from the recruiting trail. He was out in Ohio, and I was like, did you ever think that you would be recruiting some of the best high school prospects in the country for your alma mater? And he never thought that he would be in this position. He really did. And a lot of coaches will say that, being like, "Oh, I can't believe it," but I really don't. I believe him when he says that, because when he ended his NFL career, he had to retire early because of those injuries that you mentioned, Bob. He kind of went to the drawing board as like, he was a criminal justice major at Penn State. He thought, "Oh, I'll just move back to Delco." He's from, went to Strathaven, grew up in Wallingford. He's like, I'll go back home and become a cop or a state trooper, use my degree. But his dad was a longtime coach in the area, Delco Sports Hall of Famer, Jim Connor. And he had an in basically at Westchester. His dad knew their offensive line coach from years ago, coaching together. Dan volunteered there in the spring of 2014, ended up becoming the linebackers coach there when their linebackers coach left for Widener. So Dan started his career at Westchester, a D2 school, for a couple of years, kind of caught the itch, came home after a week and told his wife, like, this is what I want to do. And went from there. He went to Archbishop Carroll for a couple of years to be the head coach in high school. Said it was one of the hardest job out there is coaching high schools in terms of everything that goes into it, from managing players, parents, grades, academics, all that kind of stuff, off-season programs. Realized that coaching high school probably wasn't his calling. And then he went to Widener, a D3 program, and loved it there. He absolutely loved it at Widener. And he was there for a few years and thought that he would be there for his entire career. He told me, he was like, me and my wife and our family, they have 2 kids. We are settled in Delaware County. We could live here and I could do this for the rest of my career, work at Widener. But then James Franklin called kind of out of the blue and just said, hey, we have a position for you as a defensive analyst. He said he had to, had a 3-day conversation with his wife about leaving Delaware County. And I can attest, Bob. And it's one of those like everywhere, right? Like wherever you grow up, people have allegiances to where they grow up. It's tough to get Delco people out of Delco. It really is. So he had to have that conversation with his wife, but they said, let's take a chance. Let's go up to Penn State for a year. If we don't like it, we'll come back. If we like it, we'll stay. And they bought a house within a year of being up in State College because he just loved the environment and the atmosphere in the coaching room at Penn State. And has just worked his way up. He, as a defensive analyst, his first couple of years, the NCAA rule was he couldn't coach on the field. He couldn't be on the practice field, hands-on, coaching these guys. That changed. Ahead of the 2024 season, and he was integral both on the field, on the practice field, on the sidelines. In helmet communication with Kobe King during last season, and just proved to be an invaluable piece to James Franklin in this program, and has really done a nice job. And now officially the linebackers coach, where he, like you mentioned, is the all-time leading tackler. Like kind of a full circle, perfect deal for him. And he's still a young coach. He still has a bright future, but he's doing really good work right now. And that's kind of the Cliff Notesy version of the story, but a lot of really cool details in there. And it was great talking to Dan. So if you haven't checked that out already, go ahead on Penn Live and give that a read.
Yep. Wholeheartedly agree with everything he said. Also, Penn State fans, Dan Connor, first all-time leading tackler at Penn State. Posluszny second. Sean Lee fourth. The only one breaking that up was Greg Buttle, but again, that was a different time. This is they're playing football in an age where more often than not, it's probably going to be a safety that's going to lead the team in tackles. Just because of the way the game's played in space, it's really hard to rack up the numbers.
You don't see as many.
You don't see the neck rolls. You don't see the 2-back sets. The fullback's not in the game. There's no H-back rarely. So yeah, it's the game played in space, and Zakee Wheatley getting 16 tackles against Notre Dame it seems far-fetched, but it's really not. If he's healthy, I think you and I would both put money on him probably to lead the team in tackles. And if not him, it'll be somebody else at safety. But yeah, those are 3 of the top 4 all-time leading tacklers. Dan is an all-time great. And as we move along here on the Blue White Breakdown, let's talk about some news that came out earlier on Monday about, I believe, the College Football Hall of Fame and 2 Penn State standouts that are on the ballot to be in the Hall of Fame. It makes you wonder why they're not already on the Hall of Fame. But I think Penn State fans, what they don't realize is you have to be one of your seasons at Penn State, and I'm not saying this is the reason why they aren't there, but to be eligible, I think, for the College Football Hall of Fame, you have to have been at least one season a first-team All-American. If you're like a second or third team, I don't believe that cuts it. I'm not saying that these guys aren't first-team All-Americans, but Johnny, Ki-Jana Carter and Courtney Brown, 2 fantastic Penn State players. I think most Penn State fans probably already assume that they were already in. They're not in. I hope they don't have to wait much longer because they're both just fantastic. They're former fantastic players at Penn State.
Yeah, both guys were unanimous first-team All-Americans in their best seasons at Penn State. Ki-Jana Carter, obviously in '94, leading the Big Ten in rushing, in scoring, Heisman Trophy runner-up, first-team unanimous All-American on that prolific offense. And talk about, I just plugged the Dan Connor story. I'll plug another one really quick, but ahead of the Illinois game last year, it was the 30th anniversary of that '94 team. I was able to talk to Ki-Jana and some of the guys on that team. And if you haven't already, give that story. Just type in Google McGonigal 1994 Penn State team, and it should come up on Penn Live. But obviously Ki-Jana Carter. Like for me, I was 1 year old when Ki-Jana was doing his thing in '94. But I've seen the highlight reel. I've seen the stats. Like, that guy belongs in the College Football Hall of Fame. Surprised that he isn't already. Courtney Brown, Big Ten Defensive Player of the Year in '99, Penn State's all-time leader in tackles for loss and sacks. He was a finalist for the Bednarik, the Buckets, like all the National Defensive Player of the Year awards in '99. Another player who, very surprised they're not in the Hall yet, but they're both on the ballot, which includes, I believe, 79 FBS players. And Brown is one of 10 defensive linemen. Kajana is one of 10 running backs on that list. Seeing some of the other names on that list, Bob, I'm like, oh, wow, like Marshawn Lynch, Jonathan Stewart from Oregon, Mark Ingram from Alabama on the defensive line, and Ndamukong Suh, Aaron Donald. So, like, some more recent players in the mix now as well. But I don't know how voters could be able to overlook two players like Kajana Carter and Courtney Brown.
Yeah, I would think, and I didn't get to cover him, but Courtney Brown played on the same team that LeVar did, and LeVar was just a guy that was a human highlight reel. They went 1-2 in the 2000 NFL draft. Courtney went to the Browns. LeVar went number 2 to then Washington Redskins, not the Commanders. Courtney Brown, you said it, 70 career tackles for loss. He had 6 tackles for loss in one game. He had 29 in one season, the 1999 season. Like I said, it was a little bit of a different game. It was a little bit easier. There weren't a lot of 3-step drops going on in the passing game. It was more of a 12 or 13-step drop, and Courtney Brown usually beat the quarterback back into the 7-step drop. But I think he is maybe. I would make the argument, and I probably get voted down. I'm not sure there's a more overlooked player in Penn State history in terms of an all-time great. His season kind of gets a little bit, his career kind of gets lost in the shuffle. He wasn't a big talker, he's not going to make the all-interview team, quiet guy. And he was another guy. He and Kajana, they're kind of linked together, Johnny, for another reason. They both suffered significant severe knee injuries very early in their NFL careers. And you wonder at the next level about what might have been if those guys had stayed healthy, because neither one was quite the same after those injuries. But man, when they were at their best in State College at Penn State, Kajana's last season, Courtney Brown's 1999 season, they're right up there with individual all-time seasons in Penn State history.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, just as a note too, Penn State has 21 players in the College Football Hall of Fame. I believe 5 coaches with connections to Penn State. Obviously, Joe Paterno being one of those. Rip Engel as well. The players you talk about, LeVar is in there. I mean, the list is lengthy. Paul Posluszny being the most recent inductee in 2024, but would be surprised if Courtney Brown and Kajana Carter don't end up in that group, and maybe even Dan Connor and Sean Lee one day. You talk about the linebackers there. So yes, Penn State obviously with a lot of greats, and those two definitely a couple of them.
All right, we're winding down here on the Blue White Breakdown. Johnny, before I let you go, I think you have a pretty interesting, is it Wednesday or Thursday, shaping up in State College? It will be, I believe, James Franklin and most or all of his assistants are going to be available up there for some interviews. It's probably going to be the last chance to talk to these guys, probably until either Big Ten Media Day or Penn State Media Day, because they're going to scatter after this. But there's a lot of interesting assistant coaches, like we've talked about in the past. Like I can't imagine there's many better top to bottom coaching staffs than Penn State's. When you talk about not just the coordinators, but the longtime assistants that have been with him at Penn State. It's an impressive staff. They're all very interesting in their own right. I'm pretty sure Kotelnicki and Jim Knowles are going to be popular targets. You've already spoke to Dan Connor, so I'll be curious to see where you're heading.
Yeah. Max and I will be up there, and we'll be splitting duties on that. You got some PTO coming up, right, Bob? You got to take that time and enjoy it.
Johnny, as much as I'd love to spend at State College all day with you and Max, it's going to be tough for me, but I'm going to find something else to do for the next few days this week and next week. But yeah, I do really enjoy when we talk. I'm joking, but those guys are really interesting. A lot of those guys are very interesting and different temperaments to talk to. Jim Knowles will be popular just because he hasn't been there that long. But I mean, I've been covering Penn State since '02. Andy Kotelnicki as an interview or as a quote, that doesn't get much more impressive than that. I always enjoy talking to Phil Trautwein, especially because of what he's been able to do with the offensive line the last couple of years. You've already talked to Dan. Terry Smith's pretty fascinating guy to talk to. Poindexter, Anthony Poindexter, the safeties coach, what he's done in the safety room the last couple of years. But I also have a funny feeling that maybe a guy that's probably going to be, I think you've already talked to him. You talked to him in spring, but Marcus Higgins, I'm pretty sure he's going to be a popular guy just because of who he's working with this year and how big of a deal it's going to be for Penn State's wideouts to contribute in a larger way this year.
Absolutely. Yeah. Something that Max and I will be keeping in mind, and I'm sure everyone else there will be keeping in mind, is this is the first time we're talking to the Penn State's assistant coaches since the spring portal additions have become official and a part of the program. So Trebor Pena, the wide receiver from Syracuse, Amari Campbell, the linebacker from North Carolina, both officially within the program. So that'll be something to ask Marcus Higgins and Andy Kotelnicki about with Trebor. And then, of course, with Amari, talking to Jim Knowles and Dan Connor, see how they fit in. A programming note on this, too, in terms of the blue-white breakdown. Max and I will typically, not like every week now for God knows how long at this point. We've been going live on Thursdays at noon. Well, we're going to be talking to the coaches on Thursday at noon. So it's going to be hard to do a live podcast and interviewing these coaches. So there's going to be a change there. Whether that's, Max and I do a long post interview video that we post up here on the YouTube and on the podcast channels, or we record something earlier or later in the week. Not 100% sure yet, but just kind of stay tuned on that. Or the normal noon Thursday podcast will be moved this week.
All right. Well, I am, even though I won't be up there, I am expecting a spectacular video, a Max and Johnny video up there. It sounds like hopefully the rain has gotten the godforsaken rain that has plagued Pennsylvania for most of April and May. It'll be nice, and it'll be maybe a late 70s, early 80s day up there. Johnny, you could maybe even hang up. I mean, you could probably even hang out up there and get some golf in if you get all your work done. I'm saying that's just an idea. I don't know if you're going to do it, but it should be a very productive day. And I think Penn State fans will be on the lookout to hear from you and Max about what you were able to learn when you talk to Penn State's coaching staff.
Very much looking forward to it, Bob. Looking forward to it. And in the meantime, if you haven't read the Dan Connor story, like I said, it was a really good conversation with him, put in some good work with him. And so check that out if you haven't already, but we got plenty more coming. I also, just a plug for later in the week, I was able to speak to LaSalle College High School coach Brett Gordon, who, of course, coaches Joey O'Brien, arguably the number one recruit in the state in the 2026 recruiting class. And his teammate, Grayson McKeough, is a 4-star offensive tackle in the 26 class. Penn State, heavy on both those guys, two of their biggest targets left in the 2026 class. And I was able to talk to their head coach just about what kind of players they are, where they're at in their process right now. And those stories will be coming out Tuesday and Wednesday. So keep that in mind as well.
Awesome. That's it for this Blue White Breakdown podcast. And I can almost guarantee you, Penn State fans, at some point later this week, in some form, whether it's video, whether it's a podcast, whether it's both, or maybe it's just a straight video, you're going to see Johnny McGonigal again and hear from him.